Good morning, everybody. Like Mike said, my name is Amanda. It was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. So begins the title of today's message. It is a tale of two cities. Today we have made it. We began at the beginning of the Bible and we have finally reached the end. And in the final chapters of Revelation, we see the tale of two cities, the fall of Babylon and the descent of the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of God. The best of times and the worst of times. Babylon is the city of vice, whose days are numbered. And Jerusalem is the heavenly city to come. And the book of Revelation is God's encouragement to the early church then and the church today of what will happen when Christ returns, when creation is restored, when things are made new and the devil is finally thrown down. And in this tale of two cities, I think that God is teaching us how to live on earth out of heaven. God is teaching us how to live on earth now in light of heaven. And the first thing that we learn is that we need to leave Babylon. Revelation 18 verse 4 says, "Come out of her, my people." We need to leave Babylon because, in case you didn't get the message, Babylon is a bad place. Chapter 18 describes a place of overabundance, of luxury accumulated at the expense of others. And if you read down to verse 13, it says that the ultimate cost of all of this greed and power is human slavery. And in verse 4, Babylon sits enthroned as a queen and she boasts, "I will never mourn." You know, that describes pure pride. In verse 2, it says that Babylon is a dwelling place of the demonic. And what is being described here is a kind of systematic, satanic deception and corruption of power at a global and national level. It's oppression and injustice manifested through political and economic systems, which is all very big and abstract. So how are we meant to read this? You know, Babylon is both a physical place and a spiritual reality. Babylon historically was the enemy of Israel, where they were sent into captivity in the Old Testament in the time of Jeremiah. Babylon is also the Tower of Babel, where in pride, humanity tried to outdo God's glory and they built the first skyscraper. Babylon is the enemy of Israel in the New Testament, probably was meant to be something like the city of Rome. Babylon is both a physical place and a spiritual reality. It is anywhere where human civilization has been misdirected away from the worship of God to the corruption of sin and idolatry. It is any glorification of the creature over the creator. And the hatred of God's people. And one day, Babylon will be destroyed. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord who judges her. Revelation 18 verse 8. And last week, Mike spoke about the middle of Revelation, about winning a war against the devil. And what we see in Revelation is that the devil works not just at an individual level by deceiving people, but through what the Bible calls the principalities and powers, through authorities, institutions, structures, even nations. And if the heavenly Jerusalem is the city of God, where God dwells with his people, then the city of Babylon is the city of Satan. And in this passage, John is calling followers of Jesus to come out of Babylon. Babylon as both a physical place and a spiritual reality. And what that means for us today is that in every earthly city, be it London or New York or Sydney or Paris, wherever it is, there are always two kingdoms present. Two cities vying for control, Babylon and the city of God. And we need to leave Babylon. And to leave Babylon means resisting idolatry. We are living in a material world, aren't we? I don't know if anyone saw the headlines this week about Jeff Bezos, the boss of Amazon, who took over Venice to marry Lauren Sanchez, and apparently it cost them £40 million. We are living in a material world, and I am a material girl. Diamonds, they are a girl's best friend. And in verse 3, it describes the merchants of the earth growing rich from Babylon's excessive luxuries. By far the biggest lure of Babylon in this passage is the accumulation of possessions. And the two topics that Jesus talks about most in the Gospels are the kingdom of God and money. It's the tale of two cities. G.K. Chesterton once said that there are two ways to get enough. One is to continue to accumulate more and more, and the other is to desire less. If we are to leave Babylon, then we need to resist idolatry. We need to resist the lure of materialism. You know, if I talk to a Londoner about the city either means London in the big, or it means the square mile, the financial district, the world's biggest international banking and foreign exchange market. We are to resist materialism. We are to leave Babylon. But I think there's a risk of reading passages like this and making it simply anti-finance, reducing it to the city as the automatic centre of wickedness, and therefore the city is bad and you shouldn't work in the city. You know, one of my favourite films is a throwback to the early noughties, The Devil Wears Prada. Anyone else? Which is essentially a coming-of-age story about the wide-eyed girl from the country who goes to the city and is seduced by the wiles of luxury and power and success and expensive shoes. It's a cautionary tale about the temptations of the big city. But in the tale of two cities, in what we just read, in the restored creation, God's future redeemed world is also depicted as a city. Revelation 21 and 22 depicts the apex of God's redemption, and it's a city. Resisting idolatry is about living as citizens of that heavenly city now. And the New Jerusalem is not just any city, is it? It's a garden city. The God story, way back when we began in the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, God commissions Adam and Eve to steward the earth. They are told to fill the earth, and that commission is directing them to build a God-honoring civilization. And in Revelation 18, Babylon is a city of vice, but it is also a civilization which has lost its way. In that passage, we read about harpists and workers and weddings. In other words, this is a place of music and the arts, of crafts and manufacturing, of trade and retailing, of technological advance and of family life. And that is what the city was designed by God to do, as an instrument of glorifying him by building a civilization which honors God. And Babylon deifies that power and wealth. It deifies human culture by making art, technology, business an end in itself rather than a means of glorifying God. And I think resisting idolatry is more profound than simply saying no to the materialism around us. You know, even the writers of The Devil Wears Prada could recognize that. It's living out of heaven on earth now. Living in the light of the garden city. And the city of God is marked by God's shalom. And shalom means peace. God's city is a place of peace where God will dwell among us. And when we look at the New Jerusalem, we discover something strange. In the midst of the city is a river. You know, I would love to go bathing in a river right now. On each side of the river is the tree of life, and that tree bears fruit and leaves to heal the nations. This is the city. This city is the Garden of Eden remade. The city is the fulfillment of the purposes of Eden. We began in a garden, but we will end in a city. The city is a good thing. And the city to come is a garden city. And we are still called, just as Adam and Eve were, to the stewardship of creation with justice and with compassion. We are called to a material world. We are called to love the city. Being in the world, but not of the world. Bringing the culture of the garden. I think our fantasies tell us a lot about our desires. And this next picture, thank you, Sam, this is the ground plan for what's known as the happiest place on earth. This is the original layout design for Disneyland. And I think it looks exactly like a giant garden. Now, if we are to resist idolatry, the best way to do that is by bringing the culture of the garden to the city. And the culture of the city is burnout. It's exhaustion. It's the vortex of work more, buy more, and repeat. It's a place of striving. And what would it look like to live from a place of shalom, a place of peace, in a culture of anxiety? What would it look like to practice celebration and hospitality in a culture of cynicism and fear? To practice self-sacrifice in a culture of privilege, in a culture of perfectionism, where we put off things like marriage and children in order to have the perfect home and job first? What would it look like if we modelled family beyond just our family now? Earlier this year, we had a church weekend away, and I know a lot of you were there. And if you remember, the theme of that weekend was flourish. We talked about flourishing in our work and in our rest and in our play. And one of the things we talked about was that we are made in the image of God. And when God put Adam and Eve in the garden to work, he didn't just give them a holy place, but he gave them a holy time. Meaningful work and Sabbath, a sacred rhythm of life to allow them to thrive. Because work is meant to be meaningful, and culture is meant to glorify God, and rest is meant to defeat exhaustion. Living out of the garden is living in a place of restlessness as a non-anxious presence. You were made to thrive, and you were made to thrive in your everyday life. And you were made for godly play as well. Why else is Disneyland the happiest place on earth? How do we keep from getting sucked into that vortex of work more, buy more, repeat? Chesterton said either we accumulate more and more or we desire less. But I would challenge that because our desires teach us so much. And the key to unlocking a heavenly culture on earth is not just to desire less of this world, but to desire more of God. We are called, yes, to simplicity and generosity in the face of materialism, but fundamentally we are called to worship Jesus. And the best way to defeat idolatry is by right worship of Jesus. And it's only then that the city is transformed. The city in the Bible has always been a good thing. When Israel moved into the Promised Land, the first cities were built as cities of refuge, when an accused person could flee for safety and for civil justice. And even today, cities are always a place where people who are minorities find mercy. Whether that's the homeless or new immigrants or people in poverty or people with deviant lifestyles, they always live in the city. But a city corrupted by sin warps that diversity into racism or classism or violence. The city becomes a refuge against God by becoming the place where anything goes. People go to the city to create their own moralities. You can worship anything in a city. You can be anybody, even if it is a secular religion. Secularism isn't the absence of belief. It's where belief in God is just one option among many. That's the culture that we live in. So the cultural development of power in the city under sin creates a place of pride, of arrogance, of excess, of overwork, and ultimately of exhaustion, of restlessness, because we can't flourish without that water of life, without that river. So cities are places of enormous thirst. And that means that cities are the launch pad for the gospel. We need to love the city. You know, our fantasies tell us a lot about our desires. And I was thinking about Disneyland, that if it was designed to be the happiest place on earth where dreams come true, then does that reveal something of what we want a new heaven and a new earth to look like? It would have no crime, no litter, no unattractive infrastructure, superb landscaping, ice cream, permanently entertained children, adventure without risk, animals at a safe distance, no work, and no rain. But I think the biggest problem that we have in the church is that we have taken this God-given desire for the garden, for rest, and we do what everyone else does. We cry SOS, SOS. Life would be better if I just had some outside space. And nowhere was that more apparent in the pandemic when people left London in droves. You know, the problem we have is that we leave the city for the garden when we are called to bring the garden to the city. We are called to love the city. And too often we can end up despising the city for its worldliness. And that means that the church ends up being a bit like a fortress, separated off from the world, a place of judgment against the world without compassion, when we are meant to be the means of its redemption. Or it's the classic 5-year plan. Meet someone, get married, start a family, and then move to the countryside, because that's where dreams come true. People come to London to leave London. You know, a few weeks ago, I preached on Jeremiah when God's people are in exile in Babylon. And what does God say to them in the middle of a culture which is opposed to God? He says that they are to win the city by seeking its peace, bringing the culture of the heavenly garden city to earth. In a tale of two cities, we are to bring the garden city to the earthly city by living out of heaven on earth, to love the city, because that is the launch pad for the gospel, the place where the battle can be won. So how do we do that? Well, it's only possible if you are living out of your heavenly identity, if you know that you are a citizen of heaven. And how do we know that we are citizens of the city to come? What is the garden city like in Revelation 22? Well, there's a tree of life in the garden city because Jesus was crucified on a tree of death. He climbed the tree of death so that you could have the fruit of the tree of life. And there's a river of life because on the cross, Jesus cried out, "I am thirsty." Jesus suffered this kind of cosmic thirst. He lost everything. The Bible says that he drank the cup of God's wrath, the cosmic judgment that we deserve, so that we could drink freely from that river. And there's no more curse in the garden city. In Galatians 3, it says that Jesus became a curse for us. He broke that curse, which came in Genesis when the first Adam sinned. So God became human, the second Adam, redeeming us from the curse through his own blood. And there's no night, there's no darkness in the garden city. Jesus was crucified at midday and darkness covered the earth. And just as at the beginning of creation, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and dark and empty, and God spoke, so Jesus breathed out his last. It is finished. He entered darkness. He entered total separation from God. And in the final act of renewed creation, we will never experience darkness again. We will never experience separation from God again. We will see him face to face. And then there's the mark on the forehead. Not the mark of the beast, of those who dwell within Babylon and are led astray, but the mark of Christ. At a baptism, we mark the sign of a cross on someone's forehead. But in biblical times, who had the name of God on their forehead? And I had to look this one up. It was the high priest. Once a year on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement, he was marked with the name of God on his forehead. And once a year, he was allowed into the Holy of Holies in the temple. And Jesus is our great high priest. who has made a sacrifice of his own blood once and for all. He made atonement for all of us, and he has brought us into his kingdom of light. No longer is God accessible only once a year behind a curtain by one person. And what are we now? We are a kingdom of priests. You are a citizen of heaven. That is your identity. So what are you going to do with it? How do we live on earth out of heaven? It says in verse 3 of Revelation 22 that his servants will serve him. And I think that if we are to live on earth out of heaven, God has given us a job to do. We are to resist oppression and exhaustion by doing what Jesus does, by wiping away tears. In a tale of two cities, one day Babylon will fall. There will be a new heaven and a new earth. God will dwell with his people in the garden city, and he will wipe away every tear, but only those whose names are written in the book of life. And I ache for that day. But today, what about those whose names are not written in the book of life? Because when Jesus was on earth, as our great high priest, he went before us, bearing our sin to wipe away our tears. And where did Jesus die? Jesus died outside the city gate. The high priest on the day of Yom Kippur went into the most holy place in the temple. And you know how the writer of the book of Hebrews puts it? He describes Jesus as our great high priest, and he says that he was killed like a criminal outside the city gate, the least holy place. The least holy place is the place where the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, idolaters, and all liars. That's the least holy place, and that is where Jesus died. And he died there to make us holy through his own blood. Jesus was excluded to bring all of us in, and I don't think he meant for it to be just us. We are a kingdom of priests, called to continue that work of looking for the city that is to come. And living on earth out of heaven means wiping away tears, bringing leaves of healing. We live in the battleground of faith. We are called to love the city, to bring the garden to the city, so that everyone would taste the waters of the river of life.